question is determine, which means the solve for the amplitude, period, as well as the phase shift of the trigonometric function, and our trigonometric function will be y is equal to 2 times sine times 2x. So as we can see, this question is basically to solve for our amplitude, period, as well as the phase shift of our trigonometric function, and our trigonometric function is y is equal to 2 times sine 2x. So obviously we know that y is equal to 2 sine 2x will be a function. 2 times sine 2x will be the function, but it will going to be a relation between the trigonometric function. The reason is because we know that there are 3 trigonometric function values usually. That is sine, cosine, as well as our tangent. And our graph was formed by our sine values, 2 times sine 2x. So this question will obviously going to be related to our trigonometric function values. But if you go more in detail, we need to solve for our amplitude, period, as well as the phase shift of our trigonometric function. So in order to solve for this question, we have 3 things in order to know or in order to solve for this question. And the first thing will be the properties of our triangle trigonometry. And what are the things in our triangle trigonometry? There will be sine, cosine, and the tangent, which is the most important and the basic thing in our trigonometric function problems. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is the triangle trigonometry values, and it is the most important and the most basic thing in our trigonometric functions before we started. And what is the most important thing in our trigonometry function or our triangle trigonometry? It will be our triangle, because they are the thing that we can apply in our triangle. And what triangle specifically? It will going to be a right triangle. So if you want to apply our triangle trigonometry, we always need to require a specific triangle that has the right angle. And what is the next important thing after the triangle? It will going to be the main angle, because that main angle is the thing that generates or defines our triangle trigonometry values. Depends on our angles, our main angles locations. Depend on our main angle's location in our triangle trigonometry, its values will be different. So let's draw a right triangle and apply what the triangle trigonometry values will going to be. So the second thing we're going to talk about is graph of specific trigonometric functions. And obviously the first thing that we're going to talk about is a graph. So the first thing that we're going to talk about in our graph section will be the general graph of sine of x. And we have talked about it in a lot of videos about what this graph of a trigonometric function will going to be. But right now, this is mainly about the sine of x degrees, so I'm going to only explain the sine of x degrees and the cosine of x degrees. So in this case, let's talk about what is the graph of the sine of x degrees and the properties of the graph. Now, the most important thing in our graph is plug this into a coordinate plane. Plug this to a coordinate plane. And what is the coordinate plane? Well, coordinate plane is a plane that is formed by the x-axis and our y-axis, which will going to be our vertical and the horizontal axis. So let's graph what the general graph of our sine of x degrees will going to be. So this is our coordinate plane. There will be obviously going to be the x and our y coordinate, and our y value will be y is equal to sine of our x degrees. And our trigonometric functions graphs, they're kind of a record in our coordinate plane, while the function of our trigonometric function like cosine, tangent, as well as the sine finishes our cycle. And finishing our cycle, the function with our cycle, we'll call it as the periodic. We'll call it as the periodic function. And what is the periodic function? It is a function that has its own period, which means another way, the cycle. So for the sine of x degrees, every single trigonometric functions will be divided by the 90 degrees multiple. So if this is 0, let's say here we're going to be 90 degrees. But the most important thing in our trigonometric function is convert our degrees into a radians. And what is the radians? It is another type of notating our angle. It's another type of notating our angle, but converting our numbers, converting our degrees into the real numbers forms. So let's say this is a 90 degrees, which we're going to be pi over 2. And let's say this we're going to be 180 degrees, which we're going to be pi. And this we're going to be 270 degrees, which is 3 pi over 2. And this we're going to be 2 pi. And 2 pi, it is the end of a cycle. So if you draw a format of our sine axis graph, its maximum point should always be 1, and its minimum point should also be -1. And the graph of our sine of x will pass through this point, pi, and then 3 pi over 2, and then 2 pi. So sine of x graph will look something like this. It will pass through pi over 2, and it will go to under where the place of our x value pi is, and the 3 pi over 2, and then 2 pi. It finishes its cycle. So if we draw this in more neat way, now we need to think about what are some of the properties of the each sine's graph. And as we can see, this is our sine's graph, and this is going to be a periodic function. What is a periodic function? It's a function that has its own cycle. So the first thing that we might talk about is what type of function is this? It is a periodic function. Well, it is a periodic, and also it is a odd function. And people might think about what is the odd function. Well, the odd function means it passes through the point on the y-axis. It passes through the point y-axis. This is what the odd function is, and this one will be our sine of our x degrees graph we're going to be. Now the next thing that we're going to talk about is actual, like the actual graph's properties. Firstly, the first thing that we might talk about is what is the period, which means how many cycles does it contain. Well, there are totally 2 pi's, and its 2 pi's will going to be its total cycle, which we call it as our period. So our period will going to be 2 pi. The second thing will be what is our range. And what is the range? Range is a domain of our y coordinates, or y values. Well, our domain of our y values, the maximum is 1, and our minimum point will be -1. It won't go under -1. This is what is the range, the domain of our y coordinate will going to be. Now let's think about what is the third one. Well, third one is obviously this is a y values, then there will be a domain. What is the domain? It is a range of our x values in our coordinate. And then what is our domain? Well, they will all going to be all real numbers. The domain of our sine graph is all real numbers. That's what the x values, what is the domain? It will going to be the x values range. The x values range will be all real numbers. Now the first thing that we might talk about is what is the, let's think about what is the amplitude. The amplitude in this case will be +1, and we might talk about what is amplitude after finishing all of this. So our amplitude is 1, and the fifth one will going to be what is I think that's all. And we might talk about the amplitude is 1. So the thing that we might talk about in this case is what is the amplitude. And what is the amplitude? Well, the definition of our amplitude will going to be it is a magnitude. It is a magnitude of the periodic function. What is the magnitude? Well, magnitude refers to a height, a specific height, which means it contains either the minimum or the maximum values. But in this case, the highest one will be the magnitude, which will going to be 1. That's why the amplitude in this case will going to be the 1. What is the 1? Well, it is the maximum value of our periodic sine general graph forms. And now it's time for us to think about what is the cosine of x graphs. I guess we can talk about this in this way. So the second thing will be what is, before that, I think we made a mistake here. This will going to be a cosine graph, not a sine graph. We made a mistake. So let's draw a sine graph again. So we made a mistake here. So they're all same except the graph doesn't pass through the 1, it passes through the origin. So if it passes through the origin, it will look something like this. That goes through the that passes through the pi over 2. So it passes through this point, pi, and then 3 pi over 2. So let me make a neat graph of our sine of x graph. Sorry for mistaken, this is what the sine of x graph is going to be. This one passes through the origin, which is 0, 0. What is the origin? It's 0, 0. So this passes through the 0, 0. And obviously, this will gonna be changed. This will going to be the sine of x graph. So this sine of x graph will be the odd function. And this is the formula of our sine of x degrees. The difference between the cosine of x degrees is that it passes through the origin, or must pass through the origin. And again, the highest one is 1, and the smallest point will be -1. So this is what the sine of x graph will going to be, and we talked about its properties. And now let's think about what is the cosine of x graph. And the same thing with the sine of x graph, we will need a specific, I guess, the coordinate plane to applied. So this will be a x-axis, but the y-axis will be varied. It will going to be y is equal to cosine of our x degrees. So this will be obviously going to be same. There will be 0 and then 90 degrees, which is pi over 2. And then, I guess 180 degrees pi, 3 pi over 2, 270 degrees, and there will be 2 pi, which is the end of the cycle. So if you draw a cosine of x axis trigonometric function graph, it will look something like this. The y is equal to cosine of x graph will look something like this. It passes through the 1, which will going to be its maximum value, and this is the main difference between sine of x and the cosine of x. This will going to be a even function. And what's the even function? It is a periodic function that passes through 1. This will going to be a odd function. What is the odd function? It's a periodic function that passes through the origin 0, 0. So this is maximum point is 1, and this lowest point will be -1. So it should be -1. And this is what the cosine of x graph will look something like this. And they are exactly the same with our sine graph, and except this graph is a even function. And now let's think about 2 more things. The first thing that we're going to talk about is So the first thing that we're going to talk about right now is the general form. So a general form of trigonometric, so we'll just write it as the trig function. So we're going to write a trig function. So the general form of our trig function, trigonometric function will look something like this. It will be d plus a times whatever the trig value will going to be. So d plus trig value, so and then times bx plus c and then plus d. This is what the general form will going to be. Let's write more needed way. So it will be d plus a times trig times bx plus c and plus d. And now people might think about what does its variable does. Like, what does its variable does? Firstly, we might need to think about what is the amplitude. What is the formula for solving for the amplitude? Well, the formula for solving for the amplitude, and again, the amplitude is the magnitude of our periodic function. The formula for solving for our amplitude will be a absolute value of our a value. And people might think that what is the absolute value? What is absolute value? That looks something like this. Well, this one means, this shows that how far the number is from 0. What does it mean? That means it won't count a negative value. It will only count a positive value because it is a how far. And how far means it shows the distance. And in the distance, we can't count a negative number. We can only count a positive number. So this is what the amplitude will going to be. So it will going to be a absolute value of our a value. Now the second thing we might talk about is how can you find the period of our trigonometric function? And we know the period is a one cycle that the function takes. So the formula for our period will going to be negative c over b. Negative c over b. This is a formula for our period. And the last thing that we might talk about is what is a phase shift. And before we think about the formula, we need to think about what does phase shift means. So the definition of our phase shift will going to be, so phase shift means how far did the function move, or we can say translate, horizontally. So the phase shift shows that how far did the periodic function move horizontally. And what is the formula for our phase shift? Well, the formula for our phase shift will going to be negative c over b. And we made a mistake with the period. We kind of confused with the period thing. It is not negative. C over b. The period will going to be, what is the period will going to be? Well, the formula for our period will be 2 pi over b. This is what the formula for our period is. So let's remind ourselves the formula again. What is our formula for amplitude? It is the absolute value of our a value. The a value right over here. And what is the period? It is 2 pi over b. 2 pi over b value right over here. And what is the phase shift? Which means how far did the function translate horizontally? It is negative c over negative b. So these were the formulas for applying. So for applying our general formula trigonometric function. And let's get back to our original question. They asked us to solve for the amplitude, period, as well as phase shift of y is equal to 2 times sine of 2x. So we don't really have much spaces that we can use. So what we're going to do is we're just going to write it right over here. So our function is y is equal to 2 times sine of 2x. So first let's think about what is a value. Well, our A value is the multiplication after or the before these trig values. Our trig values in this case will be sine value, and our 2 value will be our amplitude, but absolute value of 2, which will just going to give us 2. Now let's think about what the B value will going to be. Our B value, what was the B value? It was the thing in front of our X values. What was our B value? It was going to be 2. And now let's think about what is the C value. Well, there is no C value exist after the X value, so our C value was just going to be 0. So using this A, B, and C values, we might think about the amplitude, period, as well as the phase shift. What is the amplitude of y is equal to 2 times sine of 2x? Well, it will going to be a absolute value of our A value. What is our A value? It is 2. So our absolute value of our 2 value, which will going to be 2. So our amplitude, in this case, we're going to be 2. Now let's think about what is our period. What is cycle of our periodic function? What was the formula for it? It was 2 pi over b. Now let's think about what is our b value. Our b value was 2. So it will going to be 2 pi over a b value, which is 2. It will going to give us pi. Pi will going to be what the period of our function will going to be. Now let's think about our phase shift, which means how far did the function translated horizontally. It we call it phase shift. And what was the formula for it? It was negative c over b, but our c value is 0. So this will obviously going to turn into 0. So here is our answer. The amplitude, which means the magnitude, the highest one of our periodic function, the absolute value of 2, which is 2, the period, the cycle of our of our periodic function, which was pi. The phase shift, which means how far did the function move horizontally, 0 times.